March 17, 1945. A muddy field near Remagen, Germany. The artillery had fallen silent an hour ago, and now the only sound was the wind moving through shattered trees and the distant rumble of trucks on the makeshift supply road. Corporal Nathan Pierce crouched beside a hedgerow, his rifle across his knees, watching the group of German prisoners huddled in the makeshift holding area. 23 enemy soldiers sat on the wet ground, hands clasped behind their heads, their field-gray uniforms soaked through from the morning rain. Most stared at nothing. Some shivered. At the edge of the group, separate from the others, sat a figure in a Wehrmacht coat too large for its frame, head down, face hidden. Nathan's sergeant, a barrel-chested man named Irving Kowalski, approached with a clipboard. "Need to search them before the trucks arrive," he said. "Make sure they're not hiding anything, weapons, documents, whatever." Nathan nodded and stood, his legs stiff from the cold. He was 21 years old, from a farm outside Des Moines, and he'd been in Europe for 7 months. Long enough to have seen things he'd never forget. Not long enough to have stopped feeling sick about most of them. He moved down the line of prisoners, conducting pat-downs with practiced efficiency. A few photographs. Some letters. Identity papers. Nothing that mattered. The Germans avoided his eyes, which was fine with him. What was there to say? He reached the isolated figure at the end of the line and stopped. Something was different about this one. The posture, maybe. The size. The way the coat hung. "On your feet," Nathan said in his rough German. "Aufstehen." The figure didn't move. Nathan reached down and grasped the prisoner's shoulder to help them stand. The body beneath the coat was small, slight. He felt his stomach tighten with sudden understanding. The prisoner rose slowly, and Nathan found himself looking into the face of a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 19. Her blonde hair was cropped short, almost boyish, and her face was streaked with mud and what might have been tears. Her eyes were blue and absolutely terrified. "Bitte," she whispered. "Please." Her whole body trembled. "Bitte nicht." Nathan's hand fell away. A woman. A girl, really. He'd heard rumors of German women serving in auxiliary roles near the front, but he'd never encountered one. His mind raced through the implications. She'd been trying to hide among the men, probably hoping she'd be overlooked, that no one would look too closely. "Sergeant," he called, his voice tight. Kowalski approached, his expression shifting from curiosity to surprise when he saw her face. "Well, hell," Kowalski said. He studied her for a moment, then looked at Nathan. "Still need to search her. Can't make exceptions. Could be carrying anything under that coat." The woman seemed to understand. Her eyes darted between them, and she took a small step backward. "Nini," she said, her voice rising. "Bitte. Ich habe nichts. Bitte. I have nothing. Please." Nathan felt every eye on them now. The other German prisoners watching. Several American soldiers who'd been manning the perimeter drifting closer. He saw the calculation in their faces, the curiosity, something else he didn't want to name. "I'll handle it," he said quickly to Kowalski. "Just need to do a basic search. Keep everyone else back." Kowalski nodded slowly. "Make it quick. Trucks'll be here in 10 minutes. He moved away, ordering the other soldiers to maintain their positions. Nathan turned back to the woman. She was crying now, silent tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. Her hands moved to clutch the coat tighter around herself. "I'm not going to hurt you," Nathan said in German. "But I have to check. Orders. Verstehen? Understand?" She stared at him, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. Then, very slowly, she nodded. Her fingers moved to the buttons of the oversized coat with shaking hands, but she couldn't seem to make them work properly. The buttons were too small, or her hands were too cold, or the fear had stolen all coordination. Nathan stepped closer. "Let me," he said quietly. He reached for the top button, and the woman flinched violently, a small cry escaping her lips. "Bitte nicht," she said again. "Please don't. Bitte tun sei mir nicht weh. Please don't hurt me." The words hit Nathan like a physical blow. He understood what she expected, what she'd been told would happen if she was captured by American soldiers. The propaganda the Nazis had fed their people about the brutal, savage Americans who showed no mercy, who violated and murdered prisoners without thought. He stepped back, his hands raised. "I'm not going to hurt you," he repeated. More firmly this time, he pointed to himself. "Nathan, American soldier. I follow rules. Geneva Convention. Verstehen?" She didn't seem convinced. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated with terror, and she'd begun to hyperventilate. Nathan realized she was on the edge of panic, maybe about to scream or run or collapse entirely. He made a decision. He pulled off his own jacket, the heavy wool field jacket that bore his corporal's stripes, and held it out to her. For after, he said, when you take off the coat, so you stay warm. Verstehen? She stared at the jacket like she couldn't comprehend what she was seeing, an American soldier offering her his coat. The gesture seemed to short-circuit something in her fear-locked mind. Nathan set the jacket on the ground between them, then stepped back again, giving her space. "The coat," he said, gesturing. "I need to check, just check. Then you put my jacket on. Nobody hurts you, I promise." The woman's breathing slowed fractionally. She looked at the jacket on the ground, then at Nathan's face, then back to the jacket. Her hands moved to the buttons again. This time, she managed the first one, then the second. The coat fell open, revealing the reason for her terror. Beneath the Wehrmacht coat, she wore a simple gray dress that had been torn at the shoulder, exposing skin. Whether from combat, from rough treatment by retreating German soldiers, or from some other trauma, Nathan couldn't tell. But he understood immediately why she'd expected the worst. She thought the torn dress would be interpreted as an invitation, or that it wouldn't matter either way. "It's okay," Nathan said quickly. He picked up his jacket and held it out at arm's length, keeping his eyes on her face, deliberately not looking at the torn dress. "Put this on, right now." She took the jacket with trembling hands and pulled it around her shoulders. It swallowed her small frame, the sleeves hanging past her fingertips. She clutched it closed at her throat. Nathan gestured to the German coat she'd let fall. "Pockets," he said, and mimed checking them. She nodded, her eyes still wary, but no longer quite so wild. He knelt and quickly patted down the coat on the ground, finding nothing but lint and a small piece of paper with an address written on it. Someone's home, maybe. A place she'd been trying to reach. He stood and stepped back. "Done," he said. "Fertig, you can sit down." She sank to the ground, still wrapped in his jacket, and for the first time since he'd made her stand, she lifted her eyes to really look at him. The terror was still there, but alongside it now was something else. Confusion. Bewilderment. She'd been told what Americans were. She'd believed it with the certainty of someone who'd never had reason to question. And now the reality didn't match the story. Kowalski returned. "Clear?" he asked. "Nothing," Nathan said. "She's clean." The sergeant nodded. "Trucks are here. Get them loaded. She goes with the women's detail, once we find an MP to escort her." He paused, noticing Nathan's bare arms and his t-shirt. "Where's her jacket, Pierce?" Nathan met his eyes. "She needed it more than me." Kowalski looked like he wanted to argue, then shook his head. "Your funeral if you catch pneumonia. Come on, let's move them out." The German prisoners were herded to their feet and marched toward the waiting trucks. Nathan moved to help the woman stand, offering his hand. She hesitated for a long moment, then took it. Her hand was ice-cold and very small in his. As they walked toward the trucks, she spoke quietly in German. "You are not what they told us." Nathan glanced at her.
"What did they tell you?"
"That you were animals. That you would—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Everything was lies. They lied about everything. They reached the truck, where a female MP had arrived to take custody of the woman prisoner. As Nathan helped her up into the vehicle, she turned back to him. "The jacket," she said. "I should return it." "Keep it," Nathan said. "You'll need it where you're going." She studied his face for another moment, and something shifted in her expression. The fear was still there, but it had been joined by a crack in the foundation of everything she'd believed. "Thank you," she said in careful English. "Thank you for not hurting me." The truck pulled away, carrying its cargo of prisoners toward the POW processing camp in the rear. Nathan stood in the muddy field and watched it go, thinking about the terror in that young woman's eyes and the propaganda that had put it there. The lies that had made her believe mercy was impossible, that humanity ended at national borders. Kowalski appeared at his elbow, holding a spare jacket. "Here," he said. "Can't have you freezing, though I hope you know that jacket's gone for good. You'll never see it again." Nathan took the jacket and pulled it on. "That's fine," he said. "Why'd you do it?" Kowalski asked. "The jacket, I mean. She's just a prisoner. German prisoner at that." Nathan thought about the question. About the woman's face when she'd expected violence and received kindness instead. About the small crack that had opened in her worldview, the beginning of understanding that everything she'd been told was a lie. "Because that's what we do," he said finally. "That's the difference. We don't hurt prisoners. We follow the rules. That's why we're going to win." Kowalski was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I guess that's right." The woman whose name Nathan never learned arrived at the POW processing camp 3 hours later. She was separated from the male prisoners and taken to a barracks designated for female detainees. There weren't many. Perhaps 30 women total, most of them medical personnel or communications workers captured in the chaos of the Allied advance. She kept the American corporal's jacket, When the camp administrators tried to take it from her, to replace it with proper prisoner clothing, she refused with surprising firmness.
"This was given to me,"
she said. "It's mine." They let her keep it. Over the following weeks, as she was processed and interviewed and gradually moved through the system, she wore it constantly. Other prisoners asked her about it. Where did she get an American field jacket? What had happened? She told them the story. About expecting the worst. About the soldier who'd given her his coat instead of taking advantage of her vulnerability. About the moment when everything she'd been told about the enemy proved to be wrong. The story spread. Through the barracks to other camps, carried by released prisoners back into Germany as the war ground to its inevitable conclusion. It became one of thousands of small testimonies, tiny cracks in the edifice of propaganda that had sustained the Nazi regime. After the war, the woman returned to her home in Bavaria, the address on the paper in her coat pocket. She found her family's house still standing, though her father was dead and her 2 brothers were missing, presumed killed on the Eastern Front. Her mother had survived. She kept the jacket. Years later, when she had children of her own, she would show it to them and tell them the story. About the day she learned that the enemy her government had told her to hate was capable of more humanity than her own side had ever shown. About the American soldier whose name she remembered until the day she died, Nathan. She would tell them that it was the moment she understood that everything they'd been taught about racial superiority and national destiny had been a lie. That the real measure of civilization wasn't which side you were born on, but how you treated people when you had power over them, whether you chose cruelty or chose mercy. The jacket remained in her family for decades. When she died in 1987, her daughter inherited it, along with the story. It hung in a closet in Munich, a faded piece of American military surplus that had crossed an ocean and a war and a cultural divide to become something more than cloth and thread. It became a reminder that in the midst of the worst war humanity had ever fought, there were still moments of grace. Still soldiers who remembered that the enemy wore a human face. Still choices made for kindness rather than cruelty. Nathan Pierce returned home to Iowa in August 1945. He never spoke much about the war. When people asked, he'd share the safe stories, the ones that didn't keep him awake at night. He became a teacher, married a woman named Ruth, had 3 children. He lived quietly and by most measures happily. He never knew what happened to the German woman he'd given his jacket to, never knew that his small act of decency had rippled outward, had become a story that challenged the narratives of hate, had contributed in its tiny way to the rebuilding of a shattered nation's understanding of itself. He only knew that when he'd been faced with a choice between cruelty and kindness, between the easy path of hate and the harder path of humanity, he'd chosen the latter. And in that choice, made in a muddy field on a cold March day, was distilled everything that separated the cause he'd fought for from the cause he'd fought against. Not superior weapons, though they'd had those. Not better tactics, though they'd had those too. But the simple, revolutionary idea that even in war, even with the enemy, there were still rules. Still dignity. Still the possibility of mercy. That's what it meant to be on the right side. That's what made the difference. If you have enjoyed the story, tell YouTube to send you more stories like this by subscribing to this channel, liking the video, and leaving a comment.